The Vorrakh killed every expedition that entered the shelf. Then Sena Voss walked in alone. I want to be clear about one thing before I explain any of it. I did not tame it. I did not tame the Vorrakh. I did not befriend it in the way people use that word. And I did not do anything particularly heroic on the Keleth 7 survey. I did my job. I moved carefully because the basalt flats punish careless feet. I was quiet because the caldera acoustics are strange, and noise carries wrong. And I didn't want to ruin my own recordings. I didn't run when it appeared, because running on the shelf at night is how you break an ankle in a steam fissure and die alone. And I had done enough of the risk calculus on Keleth 7 to know that running was the worst available option in almost any scenario the planet could produce. None of that is heroism. It's just geology fieldwork. The Vorrakh, apparently, saw it differently. Orvith Survey Consolidated sent me to Keleth 7 in what they were calling a reduced footprint continuation contract. What that meant in practice was that everyone else had been pulled off the shelf after the Rethys 4 team went missing. The Caldera East team filed an emergency extraction 2 hours into their survey, and the company's insurers had sent a very detailed letter about acceptable risk thresholds. The shelf, roughly 400 square kilometers of active volcanic terrain on the planet's southern continent, designated the Vorrakh Shelf, on account of the indigenous species nobody had gotten close enough to study, was expensive to access and difficult to work, and had now eaten 3 contracted survey teams in 18 months. I had been on Keleth 7 for 11 months when all of this happened. I was based at the northern transit point, doing subsurface thermal mapping, and I was 3 months from completing a survey that Orvith needed for their mineral rights filing. My contract didn't have a pull clause triggered by the shelf incidents. My survey zone didn't overlap with the shelf. I was not, technically, at risk. I stayed because the contract paid well, and because I was close to finishing, and because I am not, by disposition, easily alarmed. What happened next was partly my fault. The northern transit point is about 40 kilometers from the shelf boundary. The shelf boundary is not marked by a fence or a sign. It is marked by the point where the basalt flats change color. The older rock gives way to newer extrusion, darker, almost blue-black in morning light, and by the fact that the steam vents get denser and the temperature readings on your handheld start climbing. I knew where the boundary was. I had walked up to it several times to calibrate my edge readings. On the 43rd day of working alone at the transit point, I walked past it. I want to be honest. This was not a calculated decision. I was following a thermal anomaly that my mapping rig had flagged the previous evening, and the anomaly ran south, and I was paying attention to my instruments and not to my feet. And by the time I looked up, I was perhaps 200 meters into shelf territory, and the rock underfoot was the dark blue-black color, and the steam was drifting in thin white curtains from 3 vents within sight. I stopped. I assessed. The smart move was to go back. The anomaly reading was excellent. I kept going. I spent 4 hours on the shelf that first day. I did not see the Vorrakh. I saw its tracks. Broad, 4-toed impressions in the ashfall near the larger vents, spaced in a gait I didn't recognize, the toe spread suggesting something considerably heavier than me. I saw where it had rested near the hottest vent cluster, the basalt worn smooth by repeated contact. I saw, near the caldera lip, a neat pile of what had been a survey drone, one of the Caldera East teams, from the serial markings on the casing, disassembled with more precision than a creature was supposed to be capable of. I took readings, flagged my finds, and walked back to the transit point before dark. I filed an incident report. I went back the next morning. The first time I saw it, I was at the northern caldera lip, sitting on a flat shelf of rock that made a good windbreak, and eating my midday ration. The steam was heavy that day, visibility maybe 30 meters in any direction, and I had my instruments running passive, so as not to generate the high-frequency vibrations that interfere with the thermal readings. It came out of the steam to my left. I will describe it as accurately as I can, because the scientific record on the Vorrakh is sparse, and most of it is second-hand. It was large, roughly the size and mass of a large terrestrial bear, maybe slightly heavier through the shoulder. 4 limbs, but the front pair carried more of the weight than you'd expect, so it moved with a low, forward-pitched stance. The hide was dark, almost black, with a surface texture that caught the steam light in the way that obsidian does, slightly reflective, with an undertone of deep green. The eyes, when it turned toward me, were amber with a sulphurous yellow ring around the iris. It had no visible external ear structures. Its movements were almost entirely silent. I heard the first footfall only because a loose fragment of basalt shifted under it, and then nothing else until it stopped. It stopped approximately 8 meters from me. I was holding a nutrition bar. I did not put it down, because putting things down suddenly seemed like the wrong kind of motion. We looked at each other. I want to tell you that I thought something meaningful in that moment, that I had a realization, or felt something profound, or understood instinctively what was happening. The truth is that I was running threat assessment and coming up with very little useful data. It was large enough to kill me easily. It was between me and the only clear path off the caldera lip. The steam was too thick to navigate at a run. My extraction beacon was on my belt and would take 90 seconds to trigger a response, and I was on a planet where response time was measured in hours. Running was not an option. Making sudden movements was not an option. Making noise seemed unwise. I finished the nutrition bar. I looked at my instrument readings. I noted, in my field log, the time and a brief description of what I was observing. I did not note that I was frightened, though I was, because field logs are professional documents, and the emotion didn't seem relevant to the data. After about 11 minutes, I checked. The Vorrakh turned and walked back into the steam. I sat there for a while longer. Then I packed my equipment and walked back to the transit point, taking the long route around the vent cluster. I filed an incident report. I went back the next morning. Over the following 2 weeks, I saw it every day. Not always close. Sometimes it was a dark shape at the edge of my visibility, moving parallel to me along the caldera rim. Sometimes it was closer, 15 meters, once, at the vent cluster where I was running a continuous thermal probe, and it sat on the far side of the vent for 40 minutes, and watched the steam and ignored me in the particular pointed way that large predators ignore things they have decided not to act on immediately. I learned to read its presence by the change in the local bird analogs, small, quick things that nested in the cooler steam vents and scattered when the Vorrakh moved through. I learned that it was most active in the 2 hours after dawn and the 2 hours before dark. I learned that it was curious about my equipment in the way that very intelligent animals are curious about objects. Not destructively, but attentively, the amber eyes tracking the movement of my probe rods in a way that suggested it was trying to understand the purpose. I left it alone. I talked to it occasionally, in the low, steady tone I used for my field recordings, because I talk to myself when I work and it seemed less strange than going silent whenever it appeared. I didn't offer food. I didn't approach it. I moved through its territory the same way I move through any survey terrain, deliberately, without sudden changes of direction, in covering the ground I needed to cover. I am not a behavioral ecologist. I cannot tell you precisely why it made the decisions it made. What I can tell you is what happened. On the 16th day, I returned to the transit point at dusk to find a dead survey drone outside my tent. It was not destroyed, it was placed. Set down on the flat rock near the entrance with the lens array facing up, the way you'd set down something you were returning rather than discarding. The model was one of the Rethys 4 teams. I logged it and went inside. The company extraction team arrived on the 51st day. 3 men, Orvith Survey Consolidated Enforcement Division, out of the Keleth Regional Hub. Their transport set down at the transit point at mid-morning, while I was on the shelf running a caldera pressure series. By the time I got back, they had made themselves at home in the equipment bay and had a contract termination document waiting on my work table. The lead enforcer's name was Preth Cowell. He was a large man who had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most physically imposing person in most rooms, and was adjusting poorly to being in a room where that didn't appear to register as relevant information. "The shelf survey is being terminated," he told me. "Orvith has received a revised risk assessment from the Regional Safety Office. Your contract is being closed under the force majeure clause. You have until 0600 to pack your equipment." "I'm 3 weeks from completing the thermal mapping series," I said. "I need the complete dataset for the mineral rights filing." "Orvith has made the determination that the dataset is sufficiently complete for filing purposes." Orvith hasn't looked at the dataset. Call spread his hands in a way that communicated that this distinction was not something he found interesting. The decision has been made. We're here to facilitate your extraction. We can begin packing your survey equipment now if you'd like. No, I said. I'd like to finish my work. We went around this for a while. Call was professional about it and got gradually less professional as it became clear that I was not going to be moved by the contract document, the risk assessment addendum, or the 3 separate references he made to the Rethys 4 team and what had happened to them. He was not wrong that the Rethys 4 team had disappeared on the shelf. He was wrong that this was an argument I found persuasive in the direction he intended. Eventually his voice rose. I don't know if that was what triggered it, or if the Vorrakh had been at the edge of the transit point perimeter for longer than any of us had realized. What I know is that one of the other enforcers, who had been standing near the equipment bay entrance, made a short, sharp sound, not quite a word, and when I looked past Call's shoulder, the Vorrakh was standing at the perimeter, perhaps 20 meters out, watching us. It was not doing anything threatening. It was not growling or displaying or moving toward us. It was standing in the particular still, wait-forward posture I had come to recognize as its attentive mode, the one it used when it was deciding whether something was interesting or relevant. The 2 enforcers near the entrance had gone completely motionless. Cal turned around slowly. The Vorrakh's amber eyes moved from the enforcers to me, and then back to the enforcers. Its head was very slightly lowered. The steam from the nearest vent drifted between us. Nobody spoke. After a moment I said, I'm going to finish packing my field kit and go back out to the caldera for the afternoon session. You're welcome to stay at the transit point. I picked up my probe case. There's water in the supply locker. Make yourselves comfortable. I walked toward the perimeter. The Vorrakh stepped aside to let me pass. Not far, perhaps a meter, but it stepped aside deliberately, and as I came level with it, I got a clear look at its face, and the amber eyes were tracking Call and the 2 other men, with an expression I can only describe as patient attention. The kind of attention that has decided it will wait and see whether further action is required. I went out to the caldera. I did my afternoon session. I got excellent readings on the pressure series. When I came back at dusk, the enforcement team's transport was gone. There was a note on my work table, handwritten, which said, Extraction Order, OSC 7741 formally suspended pending review. Site Supervisor Merritt has been notified. Khalil had signed it with his enforcement division number, and nothing else. The Vorrakh was on the caldera rim above the transit point, silhouetted against the dark orange sky, watching the sun set over the volcanic plain to the west. I finished the thermal mapping series 18 days later. The mineral rights filing went through without issue. I submitted my field notes on the Vorrakh as a supplementary scientific record. They were the most detailed observational data on the species in the Orveth database, which is not as impressive a distinction as it sounds, given that most prior researchers had not spent more than 40 minutes on the shelf. Orveth sent a follow-up query asking whether I would be willing to return to Keleth 7 for a secondary survey in the following season. I told them I'd consider it. What I actually thought about, in the days after I filed the report, was something the behavioral ecologist I'd spoken to back at Regional Hub had said when I described the 16 days of observation before the drone incident. She had listened carefully and then said, Most apex predators don't demonstrate that kind of prolonged assessment before making a contact decision. Usually they've decided within the first encounter. I asked what she thought that meant. She thought for a moment. It might mean it wasn't assessing whether you were a threat. It might mean it was assessing whether you were something else. I didn't ask what she meant by that. I had a sense I already knew. Every team that had come onto the Vorrakh shelf had eventually done one of 2 things: run, or make a great deal of noise in an effort to seem larger than they were. Both are reasonable responses to a large predator. Neither of them, apparently, was the right one. The right one, as near as I can tell, was to sit on the caldera lip in the middle of your territory and finish your nutrition bar and look at your instrument readings and go on about your work, because the territory is yours and the steam is drifting and there is interesting thermal data to record, and you are not, under any circumstances, the kind of thing that runs. The Vorrakh killed every expedition that entered the shelf. It let me walk out. I have thought about that a great deal. I don't think it let me walk out because I was gentle, or because I was kind, or because there was anything soft in the calculation it made on the caldera lip in the steam. I think it let me walk out because it looked at me for 11 minutes and concluded, with whatever the Vorrakh equivalent of certainty is, that I was not prey. That's the whole of it, really. The rest was just geology. Field Supplement, Orvith Survey Consolidated, Kelith 7, Vorrakh Shelf Sector. Submitted by Sena Voss, Contract Geologist, Class 9 Planetary Survey. Note appended by Site Supervisor Merit. Extraction Order, OSC 7741, formally closed without prejudice. Enforcement team filed no incident report. Request for secondary survey contract approved.